Daniel wiped the black grease off his hands with an old rag that had seen better days. The cloth was so stained it barely cleaned anything anymore, but he kept using it anyway. That's how things were these days. Everything in his life felt worn out and tired, just like that rag. He looked around his small auto repair shop one last time before turning off the lights. The place wasn't much to look at. Just a single garage bay with tools that were older than his marriage, and a waiting area with 3 plastic chairs that didn't match. But it was his. He'd built this business from nothing, working 16-hour days, 7 days a week for the first 3 years. Now 7 years later, he was barely hanging on. Daniel locked the front door and tested it twice like he always did. Force of habit. His truck was parked right outside, looking as tired as he felt. The paint was fading. There was a dent in the passenger door from last winter, and the check engine light had been on for 2 months. Funny thing was, he fixed cars for a living but couldn't afford to properly fix his own. As he climbed into the driver's seat, his phone buzzed. It was a text from his wife, Lisa. "Don't forget we need to talk about the hospital bill tonight." He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Yeah, the hospital bill. How could he forget? Lisa was 7 months pregnant with their second child, and the complications she'd had last month meant extra tests, extra visits, extra everything. Extra money they didn't have. Their daughter Mia was only 5 years old. Sweet kid, smart as a whip. She'd asked him yesterday why they couldn't go to the movies anymore like they used to. What was he supposed to tell her? That Daddy's business was failing? That they were 3 months behind on the mortgage? That the bank had sent another letter? This one with words like foreclosure in bold letters? He started the truck and pulled onto the main road. It was getting dark earlier these days. Fall was turning into winter, and with it came the slow season for his shop. People didn't want to spend money on car repairs right before the holidays. They wanted to buy presents and food and all the things that made the season special. He understood that. He wanted those things too. The highway was nearly empty as he headed home. He'd taken this route 1,000 times, maybe more. Knew every curve, every pothole, every spot where the state troopers liked to hide and catch speeders. Tonight, though, something felt different. The sky had that heavy look to it, like it was holding its breath before letting loose. Sure enough, 5 minutes into his drive, the rain started. Not the gentle kind that taps on your windshield. This was the angry kind. The kind that pounds down so hard you can barely see 10 feet in front of you. Daniel slowed down and turned his wipers to full speed, but they could barely keep up. The old blades were leaving streaks across the glass. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 8:47. Lisa would be worried. He was supposed to be home by 8, and she didn't like it when he was late, especially now with the baby coming. She worried about everything these days, and he couldn't blame her. There was a lot to worry about. The rain was coming down so hard now that Daniel considered pulling over to wait it out. But he was already late, and sitting on the side of the highway in this weather didn't seem much safer than just driving slowly. He leaned forward, squinting through the windshield, trying to see the white lines on the road. That's when he saw it. At first, it was just a blur of red lights through the rain. Hazard lights blinking on and off. Someone was pulled over on the shoulder. Daniel's first instinct was to keep going. It wasn't safe to stop in this weather. Besides, they probably already called for help. Most people had cell phones these days. Probably had a tow truck on the way, but as he got closer, he could see a figure standing next to the car. An older man, just standing there in the pouring rain. No umbrella, no raincoat, just standing there like he didn't know what else to do. The car was nice too. One of those fancy black Mercedes that cost more than Daniel made in 2 years. What was someone driving a car like that doing broken down on this highway? Daniel drove past, then immediately felt guilty. His father's voice echoed in his head, clear as day, even though the old man had been gone for 3 years now. You never leave someone stranded on the road, son. Never. You don't know what they're going through. Could be the worst day of their life. His father had been a mechanic too, taught Daniel everything he knew about cars and about life. He'd been the kind of man who would give you the shirt off his back if you needed it, even if it was the only one he owned. Daniel had tried to live by those same principles, but lately it had been harder. When you're drowning yourself, it's tough to reach out and save someone else. Still, he couldn't shake the image of that old man standing in the rain. He looked so helpless, so lost. Daniel let out a long sigh, checked his mirror, and carefully pulled a U-turn. His truck's tires splashed through deep puddles as he headed back. He pulled up behind the Mercedes and put on his own hazard lights. Through the rain, he could see the old man turn toward him, hope written all over his face. Daniel grabbed an old jacket from behind his seat. It wasn't waterproof, but it was better than nothing. He took a deep breath and opened his door. The rain hit him like a wall. It was cold, much colder than he'd expected, and within seconds he was soaked through. He jogged up to where the old man was standing. Up close, he could see the man was probably in his 70s, maybe older. He was wearing an expensive suit that was now completely ruined by the rain. His gray hair was plastered to his head and he was shivering. "Thank God someone stopped," the old man said, his voice shaking. Not just from the cold, Daniel noticed. Something else was wrong. "I've been out here for almost an hour. My tire blew out and my phone has no signal." An hour? In this weather? Daniel felt his concern grow. That wasn't good. "Are you okay?" he asked. "You don't look so good." The old man hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "I have a heart condition," he admitted. "I'm supposed to take my medication at specific times, but I left it at home. I was trying to get to the city hospital when this happened." Now Daniel understood the fear in the man's eyes. This wasn't just about a flat tire anymore. He moved quickly, almost without thinking. "Okay, let's get this tire changed fast." "You got a spare?" "Yes, in the trunk, but I don't know how to—" "I got it," Daniel interrupted. "You just stay here and try to stay calm, okay?" The old man nodded, relief flooding his face. Daniel popped the trunk and found the spare tire and the jack. High-end car like this probably had some fancy tire-changing system, but the basics were all the same. He'd changed 1,000 tires in his career. He could do this one with his eyes closed, except his hands were freezing and the rain made everything slippery. The lug nuts were on tight, really tight. He put all his weight into it, feeling the rain run down his back, soaking through every layer of clothing. His knees were in a puddle, cold water seeping through his jeans. This was miserable, but he kept working. The old man tried to help at first, holding a flashlight, but Daniel could see he was struggling just to stand. "Sir, please get back in your car where it's dry," Daniel insisted. "I've got this." 15 minutes felt like an hour, but finally Daniel tightened the last lug nut on the spare tire. He was completely drenched, shivering, and covered in mud and road grime, but the job was done. The old man could get to the hospital now. As Daniel packed up the tools, the old man pulled out his wallet. "Please let me pay you. You've saved my life. How much do I owe you?" Daniel looked at the wallet, probably full of $100 bills. God knows he needed the money. That hospital bill was waiting at home. The mortgage payment was overdue. Winter was coming and Mia needed a new coat. But he heard his father's voice again. "Some things you don't do for money." "I don't want your money," Daniel said, closing the trunk. "Just get to that hospital safely, okay? And drive careful. That spare tire isn't meant for long distances or high speeds." The old man looked shocked, like no one had ever refused his money before. He stood there in the rain, staring at Daniel with an expression that was hard to read. Finally, he reached into his wallet again, but this time he pulled out a business card. "Please," the old man said, pressing the card into Daniel's wet hand. "At least take this. Call me tomorrow. I insist." Daniel took the card without really looking at it and shoved it in his jacket pocket. "Just take care of yourself, sir." He watched as the old man got carefully into the Mercedes and slowly pulled back onto the highway. The fancy car disappeared into the rain and darkness, and Daniel was alone again on the side of the road, soaking wet and shivering. He climbed back into his truck and cranked the heat up as high as it would go. His hands were shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. What had he just done? He'd just turned down money he desperately needed. Lisa was going to think he was crazy. But as he pulled back onto the highway and headed home, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. His father would have been proud of him tonight. He had no idea that everything in his life was about to change. When Daniel finally got home that night, he was still dripping wet. He walked through the front door, leaving a trail of water on the hardwood floor that Lisa had just cleaned that morning. She took one look at him and rushed over with a towel. "What happened to you?" she asked, wrapping the towel around his shoulders. "I was so worried. You're almost an hour late and you're soaking wet." Daniel told her about the old man on the highway, about the flat tire, about the rain. He left out the part about the man's heart condition and the offer of money. No need to make her worry more than she already did. Lisa helped him out of his wet clothes and made him sit at the kitchen table while she heated up his dinner. Their daughter was already asleep upstairs, which was probably for the best. She would have asked a million questions about why Daddy looked like he'd gone swimming in his clothes. After he'd eaten and warmed up, Daniel went upstairs to take a hot shower. As he was hanging up his wet jacket, he remembered the business card the old man had given him. He fished it out of the pocket. The card was soaked, the ink slightly smeared but still readable. Robert Chen, CEO, Chen Industries. Daniel stared at the card for a long moment. Chen Industries. He'd heard that name before. Where had he heard it? Then it clicked. Chen Industries was huge. They made parts for cars, machinery, all kinds of stuff. He'd seen their logo on shipping trucks around town. If he remembered right, they were one of the biggest companies in the state. No way. There was no way that was the same Robert Chen. What would the CEO of a massive company be doing driving alone on that highway in the middle of a storm? Rich people like that had drivers, didn't they? And security? This had to be some other Robert Chen. Maybe a regional manager or something. Daniel tossed the card on his dresser and forgot about it. He had bigger problems to worry about. Like the stack of bills sitting on the kitchen counter. Like the phone call he needed to make to the bank tomorrow. Like how he was going to afford Christmas presents for Mia this year. The next morning came too early, like it always did. Daniel made breakfast for Mia while Lisa rested. The doctor had told her to stay off her feet as much as possible, especially in these last few months. Mia chattered away about her day at school while eating her cereal, and Daniel tried his best to pay attention. But his mind kept wandering to all the things he needed to do today. After he dropped Mia off at school, he drove to the shop. Only 2 appointments today. A brake job and an oil change. Simple stuff that wouldn't bring in much money. He needed bigger jobs, more complicated repairs that took time and expertise. Those were the ones that actually paid the bills. Around noon, during his lunch break, Daniel was sitting in his tiny office eating a sandwich when he spotted that business card again. He'd moved it to his wallet that morning, though he wasn't sure why. Just seemed wrong to throw it away after the man had been so insistent about him calling. Lisa had seen the card at breakfast. "You should call him," she'd said. "What if he wants to thank you properly? We could use any help we can get right now." Daniel had brushed her off, but now, sitting alone in his office with nothing but a peanut butter sandwich and a can of soda for company, he found himself pulling out the card. The ink had dried but left watermarks across the surface. The phone number was still clear, though. He pulled out his cell phone and stared at the number. This was stupid. The man was probably busy. Important CEO types didn't have time for random phone calls from small-town mechanics. And if it wasn't actually that Robert Chen, then what was the point? But something made him dial the number anyway. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was hope. Maybe he was just tired of feeling helpless all the time. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Daniel was about to hang up when someone answered. Robert Chen speaking. The voice was clear and strong, completely different from the shaking, worried man from last night. Daniel almost hung up. Instead, he cleared his throat. Hi, Mr. Chen, this is Daniel. Daniel Murphy. I helped you with your tire last night, on Highway 17. There was a pause, and then the voice on the other end brightened considerably. Daniel, I was hoping you'd call. How are you? Did you get home safely? Yeah, I'm fine. I just wanted to make sure you got to the hospital okay. You seemed pretty worried about your medication. I did, thank you. The doctors checked me over and I'm perfectly fine. All thanks to you. Another pause. Listen, Daniel, I meant what I said last night. I want to thank you properly. Can you come to my office tomorrow? Say around 2 in the afternoon? I have something I'd like to discuss with you. Daniel felt his stomach flip. His office? So this really was that Robert Chen? The CEO? The millionaire? What could he possibly want to discuss? I don't know if I can close the shop in the middle of the day, Daniel started, but Robert cut him off gently. Please, it's important. I promise I won't take up too much of your time. There was something in his tone that made it hard to say no. Besides, Daniel was curious now. What could a man like that want with a guy like him? Okay, Daniel heard himself say. Tomorrow at 2. Where's your office? Robert gave him an address downtown. The tall glass building near the river. Daniel knew the one. He'd driven past it 100 times and never imagined he'd actually go inside. After he hung up, Daniel sat there staring at his phone. What had he just agreed to? He thought about calling Lisa, but she was probably resting and he didn't want to worry her. Besides, it was probably nothing. Maybe Robert just wanted to give him a reward or something. A thank you gift. That would be nice, but Daniel wasn't going to get his hopes up. The rest of the day dragged by slowly. His mind kept wandering to the phone call to tomorrow's meeting. He messed up the brake job and had to redo part of it, which cost him an extra hour. By the time he locked up the shop, he was frustrated and tired. That night at dinner, he told Lisa about the call. Her eyes went wide. "You're going, right? You have to go." "I said I would, but I don't know what he wants. Probably just wants to say thank you in person or something. Or maybe he wants to offer you a job," Lisa said, her voice full of hope. "Big companies like that always need mechanics, right? For their fleet of vehicles?" Daniel shook his head. "Don't get your hopes up. It's probably nothing." But that night, lying in bed, he couldn't sleep. His mind was racing with possibilities. What if Lisa was right? What if this was an opportunity? God knows they needed one. But he also knew better than to count on miracles. Life didn't work that way. Not for people like him. The next day felt like it lasted forever. He couldn't focus on anything. He kept watching the clock, watching the minutes tick by so slowly it felt like time had forgotten how to move. He'd closed the shop at 1:30, giving himself plenty of time to get downtown and find parking. He'd dressed in his best clothes, which wasn't saying much. Clean jeans, a button-up shirt that Lisa had ironed for him, and his only pair of shoes that weren't work boots. Looking at himself in the mirror, he still looked like exactly what he was, a working man who was out of his depth. The drive downtown made his nervousness worse. The Chen Industries building was even more impressive up close. All glass and steel reaching up into the sky like it was trying to touch the clouds. People in expensive suits walked in and out. Everyone looking important and busy and like they belonged there. Daniel definitely did not belong there. He parked in a visitor spot and sat in his truck for a minute, trying to calm his nerves. His hands were sweating. This was ridiculous. He'd changed a tire. That was it. He hadn't saved the world. Why was he so nervous? Finally, he forced himself to get out of the truck and walk toward the building's entrance. The lobby was huge, with marble floors and a fountain in the center. A security guard sat at a desk looking bored until Daniel approached. "I'm here to see Robert Chen," Daniel said, his voice sounding too loud in the quiet space. "I have an appointment at 2. The security guard checked his computer, then nodded. "Name? Daniel Murphy. Take the elevator to the 15th floor. Someone will meet you there." The elevator ride felt like it took forever. Daniel watched the numbers climb, feeling more out of place with each passing floor. When the doors finally opened, a young woman in a professional suit was waiting. "Mr. Murphy, please follow me. Mr. Chen is expecting you." She led him down a hallway with thick carpet and paintings on the walls that probably cost more than his truck. At the end of the hall was a large wooden door. She knocked once, then opened it. "Mr. Murphy is here, sir. Send him in, please." Daniel stepped into the office and felt his breath catch. The room was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the entire city. He could see for miles. And there, standing by those windows, was Robert Chen. The old man looked completely different than he had 2 nights ago. No rain-soaked suit, no fear in his eyes. He was wearing a crisp gray suit and looked healthy, strong, in command. This was a man who was used to being in charge, used to making decisions that affected thousands of people. Robert turned and smiled warmly. "Daniel, thank you so much for coming. Please sit down." He gestured to a chair in front of a massive desk. Daniel sat, feeling the expensive leather beneath him. Everything in this office probably cost more than everything Daniel owned combined. "I'm glad you called," Robert said, sitting down across from him. "I wanted to talk to you about something important." Daniel's heart was pounding. "Okay. First, I want you to know that I did some research on you. I hope you don't mind." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. Research? What did that mean? Had he done something wrong? Robert must have seen the worry on his face because he quickly continued. "Nothing invasive, I assure you. I just wanted to know more about the man who helped me. I know about your shop, Murphy's Auto Repair. I know you've been running it for 7 years. I also know you're struggling financially right now and your wife is expecting." Daniel felt his face flush. It was embarrassing having a stranger know his problems, especially a stranger who probably couldn't imagine what it was like to worry about money. "I also know," Robert continued, "that you're honest. Your customers say you never overcharge, never do unnecessary work. You have a reputation for being fair and trustworthy. That's rare in any business. I just try to treat people right, Daniel said quietly. And that's exactly why I wanted to talk to you. Robert leaned forward, his eyes intense. That night on the highway, you didn't just help me with a tire. You potentially saved my life. Do you understand that? If I'd stayed out there much longer in my condition, in that weather, things could have gone very badly. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. I just did what anyone would do. But that's where you're wrong, Robert said. Most people wouldn't have stopped. Most people would have kept driving and told themselves someone else would help. But you stopped. And then when I offered you money, you refused. Even though you clearly needed it, there was a long pause. Daniel didn't know what to say. I want to offer you something, Robert finally said. Something that will change your life. And with those words, Daniel's whole world was about to shift in ways he couldn't even begin to imagine. Daniel's mouth went dry. He tried to swallow, but it felt like there was a rock in his throat. Change his life? What did that even mean? His mind was racing through 100 possibilities, none of them making any sense. Robert stood up and walked back to the windows, hands clasped behind his back. For a moment, he just stood there, looking out at the city below. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, more personal. Chen Industries owns a fleet of vehicles, Robert began. Trucks for deliveries, cars for executives, vans for our technicians. Over 500 vehicles in total across the state. Daniel felt his heart start to pound. He had a feeling he knew where this was going, but he didn't dare hope. Not yet. Right now we have a contract with a large automotive service company. They handle all our maintenance and repairs. The contract is worth millions over 5 years. Robert turned around to face Daniel. But I'm not happy with their service. They overcharge us. They do unnecessary work. Their mechanics aren't invested in doing the job right, just in doing it fast. He walked back to his desk and pulled out a folder. I want to offer that contract to you. The words hung in the air between them. Daniel stared at Robert, trying to process what he just heard. A contract? For 500 vehicles? That was, I don't understand, Daniel finally managed to say. My shop, it's just me and one part-time helper. I couldn't possibly handle that kind of volume. You'd expand, Robert said simply, sliding the folder across the desk. This is what I'm proposing. A 5-year service contract worth $2.8 million. Guaranteed work. Guaranteed income. Enough to hire more mechanics, buy better equipment, move to a bigger location if you need to. Daniel's hands were shaking as he opened the folder. The numbers on the page swam before his eyes. $2.8 million. That was more money than he'd make in 20 years at his current rate. Maybe 30 years. But I don't have the money to expand, Daniel said, his practical side kicking in despite the shock. I can barely afford to keep my current shop open. How am I supposed to buy equipment and hire people? We'll provide an interest-free loan for all startup costs, Robert said. You'll pay it back over time from the contract payments, and you'll maintain complete independence. This is purely a service contract. Your business stays your business. Daniel felt like he was dreaming. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like him. There had to be a catch. There was always a catch. Why? He asked, looking up at Robert. Why are you doing this? I changed a tire. That's all. This is too much for just changing a tire. Robert sat down again, and for the first time, Daniel saw something in the old man's eyes that looked like sadness, like an old pain that had never quite healed. Let me tell you a story, Robert said. 40 years ago, I came to this country with nothing. I was young, ambitious, and completely broke. I had a dream of starting a business, but I didn't even have a decent car. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant like he was seeing something from long ago. One day, my old car broke down on the highway. It was late at night and I was terrified. I didn't know anyone. I barely spoke English. I didn't have money for a tow truck or a mechanic. I thought my life was over before it had even begun. Daniel found himself leaning forward, drawn into the story. Then a mechanic stopped. He was driving home from work, saw me on the side of the road and stopped. He spent an hour fixing my car in the dark using a flashlight. When he was done, I tried to pay him with the little money I had, but he refused. Instead, he reached into his own wallet and gave me $20. He said, "You look like you need this more than I do. When you make it big someday, pay it forward." Robert's eyes were wet now, and Daniel felt his own throat tighten. I never saw that man again. Robert continued. I tried to find him later after my business took off, but he'd passed away. I never got to thank him, never got to pay him back for his kindness. It's haunted me for 40 years. The office was quiet except for the faint hum of traffic from far below. Daniel understood now. This wasn't really about him. It was about that mechanic from 40 years ago. It was about a debt that could never be repaid. When you stopped for me that night, Robert said, when you refused my money even though you clearly needed it, I saw that mechanic in you. I saw the same kindness, the same integrity, and I realized this was my chance. This was finally my opportunity to pay forward what was given to me. Daniel didn't know what to say. His eyes were burning and he blinked hard to keep the tears back. He thought about his own father, about the lessons he'd taught, about how he'd always said to help people when you could. His father had died 3 years ago, never knowing if those lessons had really taken root. Daniel wished he could tell him that they had, that they'd led to this moment. There's only one condition, Robert said, pulling Daniel back to the present. Here it was, the catch. Daniel braced himself. I want you to train young people in your shop, kids from difficult backgrounds, kids who need a chance like I needed a chance. Teach them the trade. Give them opportunities. Help them build better lives. Daniel felt something break open inside his chest. That wasn't a condition. That was a gift. A chance to do what his father had done for him, to pass on the knowledge and the kindness to the next generation. I can do that, Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. I'd be honored to do that. Robert smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Then we have a deal? Daniel looked down at the folder again. $2.8 million. A 5-year contract. Guaranteed work. It would mean security for Lisa and the baby. College funds for Mia. No more lying awake at night worrying about the mortgage. No more choosing between fixing his truck and buying groceries. But more than that, it would mean he could build something real. Something that would last. Something his father would have been proud of. Yes, Daniel said. We have a deal. They shook hands, and Daniel felt the firmness of Robert's grip, the certainty of it. This was really happening. His life was really about to change. The next hour was a blur. Robert called in his lawyers, and they went over the contract details. Daniel's head was spinning trying to keep up with all the legal language, but Robert was patient, explaining everything, making sure Daniel understood what he was agreeing to. The basics were simple. Chen Industries would provide a list of all vehicles needing service each month. Daniel's shop would handle the maintenance and repairs. Payment would be made monthly, with a base retainer plus additional fees for major repairs. The interest-free loan for expansion would be separate, paid back over 3 years. When Daniel finally left the building 2 hours later, he was holding a signed contract and a check for the first month's retainer, plus the startup loan. The numbers on the check made his head spin. He sat in his truck in the parking lot for 10 minutes just staring at it, making sure it was real. Then he called Lisa. Hey, he said when she answered. Are you sitting down? What's wrong? Her voice was immediately worried. Are you okay? I'm better than okay. Daniel couldn't keep the smile out of his voice. I need you to sit down because what I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy. He told her everything. About the contract, about the money, about Robert's story. Lisa was silent for so long that Daniel thought the call had dropped. Lisa, are you there? I'm here, her voice was shaking. I can't believe it. Daniel, this is a miracle. I know. When you left this morning, I prayed. I prayed so hard that something good would happen, that we'd catch a break. I didn't think... She was crying now, but they were happy tears. I didn't think prayers actually got answered like this. Me neither, Daniel admitted. He was crying too, and he didn't care who saw him sitting in his truck in the parking lot, with tears running down his face. That evening, after Mia was in bed, Daniel and Lisa sat at the kitchen table with the contract spread out before them. They went through it line by line, still not quite believing it was real. What are you going to do first? Lisa asked. Daniel thought about it. I need to find a bigger space. Maybe that old warehouse on 5th Street. It's been empty for a year. And I'll need to hire at least 3 more mechanics right away, maybe 5. Good ones who can handle the workload. And the young people Robert mentioned. The apprentices? Yeah, Daniel smiled. I'll put out word at the high school and the community center. Find kids who need a chance, who want to learn. I'll teach them the way my dad taught me. The right way. Lisa reached across the table and took his hand. Your father would be so proud of you. I hope so. Daniel squeezed her hand. I'm going to name the expanded shop after him. Murphy and Sons Auto Repair, even though it's not really Sons, plural. It's just me. But it feels right. It is right, Lisa said. And maybe someday, if this baby is a boy, it will be Sons. They sat there in the quiet kitchen holding hands, thinking about the future. A future that suddenly looked so much brighter than it had just 3 days ago. Daniel thought about Robert's story, about that mechanic who had stopped to help a scared young immigrant 40 years ago. That mechanic had probably never known what his kindness had set in motion, how it had changed not just one life, but now was changing Daniel's life, and would change the lives of all the young people he'd train. One act of kindness, rippling forward through time. That night, before bed, Daniel went out to his truck one more time. He sat in the driver's seat where he'd sat just 2 nights ago, cold and wet and tired, wondering how he was going to make it through another month. He pulled out the watermarked business card from his wallet. Robert Chen, CEO, the card that had changed everything. He thought about that moment on the highway, about seeing those hazard lights through the rain, about making the choice to turn around, to stop, to help. What if he'd kept driving? What if he'd told himself someone else would stop? What if he'd been too tired, too worried about his own problems, too focused on getting home? He would have driven right past his miracle. The realization hit him hard. Sometimes the moments that change our lives look like inconveniences. They look like delays, like problems, like someone else's emergency. If we're not careful, we drive right past them, never knowing what we missed. Daniel made himself a promise right then. No matter how successful his business became, no matter how busy he got, he would never drive past someone who needed help. Never. Because you never know when helping someone else might be the moment that saves you both. The next 3 months were the busiest of Daniel's life. Every single day felt like a whirlwind of decisions. Phone calls, paperwork, and endless lists of things that needed to be done. But for the first time in years, it was the good kind of busy. The kind where you fall into bed exhausted but satisfied, knowing you're building something that matters. The first thing he did was lease that warehouse on 5th Street. It was bigger than he needed right now. But Robert had advised him to think ahead. You'll grow faster than you expect, the old man had said. And Daniel was learning that Robert was usually right about these things. The warehouse needed work. The concrete floor was cracked in places. The overhead lights were mostly burned out. And there was a family of raccoons living in the back corner that took 3 days to relocate. But Daniel could see the potential. He could see it transformed into a real, professional shop with multiple bays, proper equipment, maybe even a comfortable waiting area for customers. He hired a contractor to fix the floor and install new lighting. While that was happening, he started ordering equipment. Lifts, diagnostic computers, tool sets, an air compressor that didn't sound like it was dying. Everything he'd dreamed of having but could never afford. The second thing he did was start looking for mechanics. He needed good ones, experienced ones, people who took pride in their work. That was harder than he expected. A lot of mechanics applied, but many of them were just looking for a paycheck. They didn't care about doing things right, just about doing them fast. Finally, he found 3 guys who seemed like the right fit. Tom was 52, had been working on cars since he was 16 and could diagnose engine problems just by listening. Kevin was 35, specialized in electrical systems, and had a patience for complex problems that Daniel admired. And Pete was 41, a transmission expert who'd been laid off from a dealership 6 months ago and was desperate to get back to work. Daniel met with each of them individually, told them about his vision for the shop, about training young people, about doing honest work. He could tell they were skeptical at first. They'd probably heard similar speeches before from owners who talked big, but didn't follow through. But something in Daniel's voice, in his passion, must have convinced them because all 3 agreed to come on board. The third thing, and maybe the most important, was finding the apprentices. Daniel put up flyers at the local high school and the community center like he'd planned. He also talked to teachers, coaches, counselors, anyone who might know a kid who needed a chance. The response surprised him. He got over 20 applications from teenagers who wanted to learn the trade. Some were high school seniors trying to figure out what to do after graduation. Others were kids who'd dropped out and were looking for a fresh start. A few were in foster care, aging out of the system with nowhere to go. Daniel interviewed each one personally. He didn't care about their grades or their backgrounds. He cared about whether they showed up on time, whether they looked him in the eye, whether there was a spark of genuine interest when he talked about engines and transmissions, and the satisfaction of fixing something that was broken. In the end, he chose 4 apprentices. Tyler was 17, shy, but his hands were steady and he listened carefully to every instruction. Jordan was 19, had dropped out of school at 16 but was trying to turn his life around. Amy was 18, one of only 2 girls who applied, and she could name every part of an engine just from studying repair manuals at the library. And Chris was 16 in foster care, quiet and watchful. But Daniel saw something determined in his eyes. The shop officially opened on a cold Monday morning in January. Daniel stood in the empty warehouse that wasn't empty anymore, looking at the 5 new hydraulic lifts, the organized tool chests, the bright LED lighting overhead. Tom, Kevin, and Pete were there, talking and joking as they familiarized themselves with the new equipment. The 4 apprentices stood together in a nervous cluster, not quite sure what to do with themselves yet. Lisa was there too, 8 months pregnant now and glowing despite her swollen ankles. She held Mia's hand and their daughter was bouncing with excitement at seeing Daddy's new shop. "You did it," Lisa whispered to Daniel. "I'm so proud of you." Daniel pulled her close, careful of her belly. "We did it. None of this would have happened without you supporting me." Robert Chen showed up an hour later with a bottle of champagne and a camera crew from the local news. Daniel had tried to talk him out of the publicity, but Robert insisted. "People need to hear good news," he'd said. "They need to know that kindness still matters." The news story aired that evening. Daniel watched it at home with Lisa and Mia, feeling embarrassed by how emotional he looked on camera when Robert told the story of the flat tire. But the response was immediate and overwhelming. By the next morning, his phone was ringing off the hook with people wanting to bring their cars to his shop, even though he'd explained they were under contract and couldn't take outside work for now. The first month was rough. Learning to manage a larger operation was harder than Daniel expected. There were scheduling conflicts, communication breakdowns, equipment that malfunctioned. One of the apprentices, Jordan, showed up late 3 times in the first week, and Daniel had to have a hard conversation with him about responsibility. But slowly, things started to smooth out. The team found their rhythm. Tom became an unofficial mentor to the apprentices, teaching them tricks he'd learned over 35 years in the trade. Kevin set up a system for tracking which vehicles needed what services. Pete turned out to have a gift for training, breaking down complex repairs into steps that even the youngest apprentice could follow. The apprentices surprised Daniel. He'd expected it to take months for them to become useful, but they learned fast. Tyler had a natural talent for diagnostics. Jordan, once Daniel got through to him about showing up on time, turned out to be fearless when it came to tackling difficult jobs. Amy was meticulous, never rushing, always double-checking her work. And Chris, quiet Chris, absorbed everything like a sponge and asked questions that showed he was really thinking about what he was learning. By the end of February, Lisa gave birth to their son. They named him after Daniel's father, and when Daniel held the tiny baby in his arms, he felt like his life had come full circle. His father would never meet his grandson, but in a way he was there in that moment, in the values he'd taught Daniel, in the choice Daniel had made to stop on that rainy highway. In this new beginning, that was really a continuation of something that started long ago. Robert visited the shop regularly, always finding an excuse to stop by. Sometimes he'd bring coffee for everyone. Sometimes he'd just walk around, watching the mechanics work, chatting with the apprentices about their progress. Daniel realized that Robert was lonely. For all his wealth and success, he didn't have many genuine friendships. Most people saw him as a business opportunity or a means to an end. But Daniel saw him as something else. A mentor, a friend, a man who'd taken his own second chance and turned it into someone else's first chance. One afternoon in early March, Robert pulled Daniel aside while the shop was busy with work. "I have something to tell you," Robert said. "My board of directors wants to know why I gave such a large contract to an unknown mechanic with a one-bay shop." Daniel felt his stomach drop. Was the deal falling through? Had Robert's company decided this was a mistake? Robert must have seen the panic on his face because he smiled. "Don't worry. I told them to come see for themselves. They're visiting next week. Next week? Daniel's mind raced. The shop was running well, but it wasn't perfect. There were still rough edges, still things he wanted to improve. Relax, Robert said. Just show them what you showed me. Honesty, quality work. People who care about what they're doing. That's all they need to see. The board visit was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. Daniel spent the entire week making sure everything was perfect. The shop was cleaned until it sparkled. Equipment was organized and labeled. Tom, Kevin, and Pete wore matching work shirts Daniel had ordered. Even the apprentices looked professional in their new uniforms. When the board members arrived, 6 serious-looking people in business suits, Daniel gave them a tour. He showed them the diagnostic bay where Kevin was troubleshooting an electrical issue. He introduced them to Tom, who was teaching Tyler how to properly bleed brake lines. He explained the apprenticeship program, showed them the training schedule he'd developed, talked about the importance of investing in young people. The board members asked tough questions about efficiency, about turnaround times, about quality control measures. Daniel answered as honestly as he could, admitting when he didn't know something, explaining his plans for improvement. At the end of the tour, the board members huddled together, talking in low voices while Daniel stood nervously to the side. Robert caught his eye and gave him a small nod, but Daniel couldn't read what it meant. Finally, the chairwoman of the board, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, approached Daniel. "Mr. Murphy," she said, and Daniel braced himself. "I'll be honest. When Robert first told us about this arrangement, many of us were skeptical. A 5-year contract to an unknown shop based on a flat tire. It seemed impulsive." Daniel's heart was sinking. Here it came. The cancellation. The end of the dream. "But after seeing your operation," Patricia continued, and her stern expression softened slightly, "I understand why Robert made this decision. What you're building here isn't just a repair shop. It's a training ground, a second-chance factory, and your work quality is exceptional." Daniel felt like he could breathe again. "The board would like to propose an expansion of the contract," Patricia said. "We have facilities in 3 other cities that need reliable automotive services. Would you be interested in opening additional locations?" Daniel's mind went blank. More locations? He'd barely figured out how to run one shop and they wanted him to open more? He looked at Robert, who was smiling broadly now. Then he looked through the shop windows at his team. Tom was demonstrating something to Amy, his hands moving as he explained. Kevin was under a lift, Chris holding a work light for him. Pete was reviewing a checklist with Tyler and Jordan. 6 months ago, Daniel had been alone, drowning in debt, afraid of losing everything. Now he had a team, a purpose, an opportunity to help more people, to spread this second-chance factory to other cities, to other kids who needed what his apprentices had needed. "Yes," Daniel heard himself say. "I'd be very interested," Patricia smiled. "Good. Let's talk details." As the board members filed into the small office to discuss the expansion, Daniel stood in his shop surrounded by the sound of tools and engines and voices calling out to each other. This was real. This was his, and it was growing into something even bigger than he'd imagined. He thought about that moment on the highway, about the choice to turn around. One decision, one act of kindness, and look what it had become. The ripples were spreading farther than he ever could have guessed. 1 year later, Daniel stood in front of the mirror in his bedroom, adjusting his tie for what felt like the 100th time. He still wasn't comfortable wearing a suit, probably never would be. He was a mechanic at heart, happiest in work clothes with grease under his fingernails. But today was special. Today required a suit. "You look handsome," Lisa said from the doorway, their son balanced on her hip. Little Thomas was almost a year old now, starting to walk and getting into everything. "I look uncomfortable," Daniel corrected, but he was smiling. "How did this become my life?" "You earned it," Lisa said simply. "Now let's go before we're late." The ceremony was being held at the community center, the same place where Daniel had put up flyers looking for apprentices a year ago. Today, that first group of 4 apprentices was graduating from the program. They'd completed their training, passed their certification exams, and were now fully qualified mechanics. The parking lot was packed when they arrived. Daniel recognized cars belonging to Tom, Kevin, and Pete. Robert's Mercedes was there too, parked in a spot marked reserved. The old man had insisted on being part of this celebration. Inside, the main hall had been decorated with banners and balloons. Rows of chairs faced a small stage. People were already gathering, family members of the apprentices, community leaders, a few reporters that Robert had invited despite Daniel's protests. Tyler's grandmother was there, crying happy tears before the ceremony even started. Jordan's mother sat in the front row, looking proud in a way that made Daniel's chest tight. Amy's foster parents had driven 3 hours to be there, and Chris, who'd aged out of the foster system during his training, had invited his caseworker, the one person who'd never given up on him. Daniel spotted his 4 graduates standing together near the stage, looking nervous in their new dress clothes. He walked over to them. "How are you guys feeling?" he asked. "Terrified," Tyler admitted. "What if I mess up my speech?" "You won't," Daniel assured him. "Just speak from the heart. Tell people what this year meant to you." "It meant everything," Amy said quietly. "You know that, right? This program, what you did for us, had changed our lives." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "You guys did the work. I just gave you the opportunity." "That's what I needed," Chris spoke up. He was the quietest of the 4, but when he talked, everyone listened. "Nobody ever gave me an opportunity before. They gave me pity, or they gave me rules, or they gave me lectures. But you gave me a chance to prove what I could do." The ceremony started a few minutes later. Robert was the first speaker, and he told the story that everyone had heard by now. The flat tire, the rainy highway, the mechanic who stopped when he didn't have to. But hearing it again, seeing Robert's eyes get wet when he talked about that moment, it still hit Daniel hard. Then Daniel took the stage. He'd prepared a speech, had it written out on cards in his pocket. But standing there looking at his 4 graduates and their families and his crew and Robert, the card suddenly felt wrong. Too formal. Too prepared? He left them in his pocket and spoke from his heart instead. "A year ago, I was barely keeping a one-man shop open. I was drowning in debt, scared about the future, wondering how I was going to provide for my family. Then something happened that changed everything. But it wasn't what you think." He paused, gathering his thoughts. People hear this story and they think the miracle was the contract, the money, the opportunity. And yeah, those things changed my circumstances. But the real miracle was remembering why I became a mechanic in the first place. My father taught me this trade. He taught me that fixing things that are broken is noble work. That helping people is what matters. That kindness isn't weakness, it's strength. Daniel looked at his graduates. These 4 young people reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. That everyone deserves a chance. That where you come from doesn't determine where you're going. That talent and determination matter more than privilege or connections. Tyler's grandmother was crying again. So was Jordan's mother. Daniel pressed on. "Tyler, you came to me barely able to look people in the eye. Now you're one of the best diagnostic technicians I've ever worked with. Jordan, you were trying to turn your life around after some hard years. Now you're the guy everyone trusts with the toughest repairs. Amy, you had to fight just to be taken seriously in a field that doesn't always welcome women. Now you're teaching the other apprentices things even I didn't know.